The world can seem upside down at times, which has set me on a journey in search for love, truth, and ultimately personal freedom. I'm on a mission to help people find peace and healing so that each of us as individuals and ultimately the collective can be free from whatever keeps us stuck and skews our view of just how beautiful this life can be. Welcome to the Mack Show. Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to another episode of the Mack Show. I am Mack, and thank you for joining me. I'm really, this episode, I bring on Leola Watkins, who is profound, and we had a conversation before I brought her on the podcast because she reached out to me about her new book that actually comes out today, July 8th, 2024, called Sacred Sex Ed. And, many people feel uncomfortable talking about our sexuality, and she's a tantric sex teacher, but really she's a transformational coach. In this book, she gave me a pre-read copy of it, and I've been reading it. I'm almost done, and it is so profound. I believe so many, and we talk about it in this podcast, have dealt with sexual abuse or sexual trauma in so many different facets. And where do we go to talk about it? It's not mainstream. It's not a topic that is, people readily speak of in circles because there's so much shame to it. But part of my purpose from this podcast, all the way when I started back in 2017, is for me to share my journey with you so you don't feel alone in your journey. And part of this journey is talking about all the things we feel shame and fear and uncomfortable to talk about. And the sexual trauma and our relationship with our body is one of these things. And so this episode, and Leola, I'm so honored and proud of. The book is amazing. I recommend every single person read it. I have not read a book in a long time where I recommend it so strongly. But this book, Sacred Sex Ed, which you can get on Amazon, is really profound. And so everyone, I hope you enjoy this episode. And my dear brothers and sisters, I send you all love on your journey of healing. And here is Leola. All right, brothers and sisters, like I shared, this is a topic that I think for so many, especially for myself, has been taboo or feel just uncomfortable talking about it. And it shouldn't be. And Leola, I'm so honored to have you on the podcast, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be entrusted with your community to bring this topic that, as you said, is quite challenging and taboo and vulnerable for so many of us. So thank you for having me to bring this to light.
My pleasure. And everyone, I got a copy of Leola's book, Sacred Sex Ed. I told her when I hopped on the call, it's phenomenal. I mean, I finished 3 books earlier this week, or finished 2 and almost done with a third. And I started Leola's, and yours is, I think, better written than these quote unquote spiritual classics. Like, it's so good. Your cadence, your tone of voice, like I can hear you. It's fantastic. And I want to, before we really dive in, I want to read this paragraph on page 1. And I think this sets it up so well. So you said, my worldview has done a complete 180 into a more empowering perspective where I used to wallow in anger, collapse in fear, and get in my own way over and over again. I now have self-compassion, trust in the universe, and confidence to take inspired action in all aspects of my life. I look at my life's work founded on the principles I share in this book with immense pride, knowing it has healed trauma, enlivened marriages, addressed inner child wounding, activated abundance, and empowered individuals to create a life that turns them on. Like, what else is there? That's incredible. Truly incredible. Well, thank you for coming on. And I'm so excited to dive into this. I think, we had a pre-call, wanted to connect with you, and there's so much that I'm working through in my own healing in this journey. And I've done so much. I mean, I talk a lot about my own healing journey. And this is like that layer that is so deep, for me, and I know for many. I understand just by reading your book a little bit of your story, but why don't you explain how you even got into this world of tantric healing and writing the book Sacred Sex Ed?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that little snippet. And I love how much it's speaking to you already. And I'm excited to hear how it continues with the entirety of the book itself.
Hmm.
So, for me, I started this journey with Tantra and shamanic sexuality, sacred sexuality, about 10 years ago. I had been, dabbling in spirituality and mindfulness and healing and self growth, and was reading all the books and going to the yoga classes and like working on myself. But I noticed that it wasn't like getting to the root. It wasn't
Hmm.
getting to the deepest part of me. And it wasn't touching the energy that brought me into this world, which is our sexuality,
Yeah.
and recognizing that all of us are here because of sex. You, me, every
Yeah.
listener, every plant, animal, the food we eat in a way was
Right.
created by this energy, many of the clothes that we wear. So when I started to tune into healing that piece, which so many lineages don't address because it is so taboo, when I started to work with sacred sexuality, healing my relationship to my body, healing my sexual trauma, everything started to shift in my entire life, which makes sense because this energy is the reason for our existence in a way, or it is one important ingredient in our existence. And I started to look at like all of the sexual trauma that I had. And I mean, I was, a victim of a more, like sexual assault, like a more clear, circumstance, but
Hmm.
like my sexual education was traumatic. And for most people in the modern day, their sexual education is also traumatic. Our societal conditioning is inherently traumatizing around, sexuality. Even if you had like parents that were super cool and they were like, here's some condoms, the whole thing, like you can't escape religion, which is one
Right.
of the foundations of our society. You can't escape school sex ed. You can't escape peers who are taking things from their parents and their experiences and sharing and projecting. You can't escape media. Even the government has its hand in sexuality and spurring fear and shame, which I can get into some examples if you'd like.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I just started healing some of these pieces, and it changed my entire life. And
Hmm.
people started to notice and get curious and ask questions. I started like very gingerly sharing on social media, and I had a lot of fear about it, which I write about in the book. But inevitably, what really like shifted the needle for me was before I was in this work professionally, I actually did freelance writing and creative directing and a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
And I did some pro bono work for a nonprofit that's based in India. And they actually free children from sex trafficking. So it was
Wow.
like a cause that was super near and dear to my heart. I got involved. I introduced the founders. I like did all their website copy. I introduced them to my friend who was who does film, and he volunteered to create like a film about the organization to spread awareness and get donations. And I was invited to be the person that created the storyline, did the interviews, things like that. So I went to India, and I, was doing all of these, I was talking to the survivors, these children. I was talking to social workers, police officers. We went on a legitimate raid and like
Wow.
freed like 4 girls.
Wow.
And it was incredible. It was incredible work. We're arresting the bad guys, we're freeing the innocent. But at the end of the day, I was realizing like this isn't getting to the root, though, either. It's not getting to the demand. Like, why are people thinking that the only way that they're going to have their desires met is by raping.
Mm,
And that, like, I knew this work. I
mm,
knew the impact of sacred sexuality. I knew its healing capacity. And I knew that this could be, like, maybe not a panacea, but a major shift in healing these pieces and helping people understand and bring light, to their shadows, because it's
mm.
my belief that all of the repression, the misinformation, and the shame that we inherit around, our sexuality is the root of most, if not all, sexual assault. So if we can
Mm.
replace this conditioning, we can break this cycle. We can embrace our sexual selves with love and acceptance. And it's my belief that with this information, sexual violence could massively decline and even,
Yes.
disappear from our
Yes.
society. And then on top of it, like, we can also have more amazing sex and intimacy and relationships. So
I mean, that all
that's my,
sounds like a win-win, like the epitome of
yeah,
a
yeah, it's
win-win,
great.
right? Yeah. Um, Fascinating. I guess there's a couple of things I want to share and get your thoughts on, but my first TEDx talk was titled Breaking the Cycle of Child Abuse. And I really just kept it on the physical abuse, although I did talk about the six categories: verbal, psychological, spiritual, sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. And all six of those categories I experienced. But I got selected for another TEDx talk, but it got canceled during the pandemic. But the whole premise was when men heal, the world heals. Essentially, it was my working title
Mm,
was Me Too, Us Too, Pain is Pain. And
yeah.
and I talk about men, and I'm just going to share this real quick because you're talking about the raping aspect of it, which is predominantly men, although not 100% men, but men have the Y chromosome. And I look at that Y, like women have two X's, so they can receive on every side. They're naturally inclined to be more vulnerable and receptive on that energy. But
Yeah.
men with the Y can only receive if the balance of masculine and feminine energy are intact. But if we
Mm,
get wounded as men and we're not taught that it's safe to be vulnerable and it's safe to open up because it's taken from us or intimidated, or some force inserts itself in our lives early on, we close off our vulnerability, and then we're just left with the masculine when they say toxic masculinity, whatever, that word's become so kind of clouded. But essentially, when men are taking from another person to get what they need, it's because they don't know how to open back up that vulnerability and to receive in that feminine energy again. And so what you're talking about, I think, is so important because unless we talk about truth, we can't be free and the cycles can't
yeah.
break. Like, we have to bring everything that's in the shadows into the light. And I think this is the depth of what's in these shadows. Like you're saying, the sex trafficking and everything that's hidden and secret and shameful and done in the dark. Like, you're just bringing light to it and saying it's beautiful in the light, when we can address these things in a healthy way. So seriously, sis, like, amazing. I'm amazed by you and the topic that you're standing on.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to just say that, just to reiterate what you were bringing up about men and opening up and vulnerability, it's like we're in this state of the world currently where men are getting like a lot of heat as to like the current state of the world.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's justified doesn't really matter, but it's not men's fault. Like, they're victims of this
Right.
just as
That's
much
exactly right.
as women are, or
Yeah.
it's not serving any of us. And in relation to the sexual assault piece specifically, there's studies that show from the National Criminal Justice Reference that offenders of sexual assault are 10 times more likely to have been a victim themselves
Yes.
before they
Yes.
commit this crime.
Yes.
So, and I've seen this play out in my own life. I've seen this play out in the lives of my clients. And when you think about it, if we have this collective sexual trauma because of our education and religion and society, like we're all operating in this space of being a victim and then are 10 times more likely to be an offender
Mm,
by result. So it's like really this complicated
yeah.
pattern, and, avoiding healing our relationship to our sexuality then becomes dangerous to ourselves, and it also becomes dangerous to the world. But the
Right.
good news is like we can totally, work on this. And, another thing with the Me Too movement is that like women have a responsibility in this too, and we all do. But generally, women are conditioned to be more, receptive in the situation,
Mhm.
and therefore also need to be taught how to read their bodies and to feel comfortable in saying no and asking for
Yeah.
what they want and setting boundaries. And women haven't been taught how to do that. And men haven't really been
Powerful.
taught how to ask for consent. So you get in these situations where it's like, quite complicated when you have two people that don't have the tools, and it just gets really messy and sticky and
Mm.
confusing. And it's like, it's kind of no one's fault, but also like, it's also your
Everyone's
responsibility.
responsibility. Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally
To,
right.
to learn these things.
It's interesting. I had this, so I grew up in evangelical fundamentalist Christian world. And I went in and ran my own ministry for a long time. And I had this pastor tell me one time, and I don't know if you've heard this reference, and it's, we don't need to go down this, but he did make a point that I find fascinating. I want to get your thoughts on this. So there's this whole concept of put on the armor of God, and it talks about the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness,
Mhm.
shield of faith, belt of truth, sword of the spirit, feet shod with preparation of gospel peace, in the um, shield of faith. What's interesting is the belt of truth. It's called the belt of truth. And the pastor told me, he's like, truth, like, liberates our sexual reproductive areas. And he was going down, I don't remember everything he said, but I've always found it fascinating. It wasn't like the shield of truth or the helmet of truth. It was the belt of truth. And I never understood, then why is there so much shame around sexuality in the religious world if truth literally is supposed to like cover? I
Yeah.
mean, the King James Bible says um your loins girt about with truth. Like, it's a funny way to say it, but it's like we're not talking about truth in this area in mainstream narrative anywhere. And I think it's so important that what you're bringing forth is like to talk about the truth of it all, and not let, like in your book, a movie or in my life, a movie educate me on certain things. And I'm like, oh crap, wow, what is that?
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. And for those that are listening, Lucas is referring to, like, in the book, I share my sexual education and how it was like traumatizing. And part of it was my mom had me watch this movie Kids, which is like a movie from, I think it's the early 90s or late 80s. Anyways, it's like terrifying, and it's basically like coming of age, New York City. In the opening scene, there's like rape. It's like so scary. And I mean, that by extension, my mom showed me that to, enlighten me to the possible realities, but it was
Mm.
fear. It was like fear based. And that's what this book is about. It's about, this is the sex education that you didn't have, that we all desperately need, that is, true, but also empowering and pleasure based, and isn't just framing things around be afraid of this part of yourself, do it in the dark behind closed doors, which so many of us
Mm.
then learn, like to grow up and to be quick in this act, and lights
I
off, and
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
quiet, like not expressing, and all of those patterns are really limiting us from stepping into our sexual potential and the potential for, incredible pleasure and the connection to godliness. This is a little bit, conspiracy theory ish,
I love
but,
it. Bring it.
bring
This,
it. Let's go.
yeah,
Okay.
so let's go.
So yeah, so it's my belief or potential curiosity that the reason that we've been so conditioned to be afraid of this energy is because it is so powerful. when we are empowered in our full sexual energy, the energy that brought us into the world, we become sovereign and we don't need religion or government or science as much. Obviously, all of those external resources have their time and place and are amazing. But it's my belief that they created this fear to lead us away from our own power. If you like, for me, like I feel closest to something outside of myself and godliness on the brink of orgasm, but it wasn't always like that. I used to orgasm and feel shame because I just masturbated or had premarital sex, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was disconnecting me to the higher possibility that was available in the moment. And it took unpacking all of the like beliefs that I took on that weren't actually mine.
Amazing. That's true. And I'm like, I'm listening to you. Part of it, I'm like an observer of this podcast and guiding it because it's just such a good point. We have been conditioned to be batteries to this machine that, truly like the Matrix, they say is, was a documentary and sovereignty. It's so interesting. I'm on this journey, like I was kind of saying before we started our podcast when we had our first conversation. Like I was so hardcore about sovereignty, like, and when I put all this content out, what we don't say no to is left on. Is no is the reverse of on, no or on, and so we've been not taught to say no, and by default we don't know how to say yes. Our yeses mean nothing if we don't have a no to contrast it. And but sovereignty was all about, no one forcing me to do anything against my will. But this is like the
Yeah.
other side of sovereignty that you're bringing forth to light in my understanding, which is, yeah, I'm fine saying no to someone. Like I'd rather die than comply type narrative. But that's always in resistance to an outside force. What about my internal choosing? And that's where I'm so fascinated about this topic because there is this other side of sovereignty. It's not always saying no to the government or to whatever. It's saying yes to ourselves. And I'm just started your book. So I don't really have much more to say, but I would love to hear more from you on, how did you embark on this journey?
Yeah, so I want to go a thread deeper in that piece on sovereignty and related in relation to this work and all self-development work in general. Like my intention is for anyone that comes into my space to feel more and more empowered to trust themselves. Like
Mm,
let that be the North Star. Anything that I say on this podcast, in the book, otherwise, try it on, see how it feels, but I'm not going to take it personally if it isn't resonating for you. And the beautiful thing about finding liberation in your sensuality, your sexuality, your body is that it can look different in different periods of your life. So what looked like, liberated sexual expression for me 5 years ago is very different than how it looks today.
mm,
For example, when I first embarked on this healing journey, I stopped watching porn. I stopped doing all the kinky, crazy things that I was doing that was kind of a way of me like reliving my trauma and trying to make sense of it.
mm,
And so I really kind of went into this like consciously celibate internal journey space. And as I healed, I slowly opened the door back up into exploring more of my darker primal desires with the intention of just understanding more of my humanity and coming into a
mm,
more holistic space. So I just want to give
mm.
everyone listening permission to say, hey, like, your sexual liberation doesn't need to mean like, I'm going to be naked all the time and go to orgies or whatever. It
Yeah,
can also look
yeah.
like, hey, this is my sacred temple and I'm rewriting my relationship to this entirely. Like, what would it look like to ask yourself for consent and to try that on? So many of
Mm,
us go straight into self pleasure and immediately are groping our genitals. And it's like, what would it mean to slow down, listen to your body, trust, and feel and move with intention and softness and slowness? So just wanted to put
mm.
that out there.
Yeah.
But you had asked
Yeah.
something.
How'd you embark in this journey? Like what led you into this? And I know about it from reading the book, but how'd you get into the tantric modality and learn this?
Yeah. So my first, like the first moment that I learned about Tantra, I was in my early 20s. I had recently gotten out of a relationship, and I met this guy at a coffee shop, and he was not my type at all. But he had this effervescence, this aliveness, this radiance, this energy of like being turned on by life. Like he had
Mm,
something. And so I was like, all right, I'll go on a date with him. And we ended up kind of creating this like lovership. And he had actually had a partner that was practicing Tantra in the past. So he had kind of like soaked in some of her codes and was basically sharing them with me. And there wasn't anything particularly different about the way that we connected in person or like both, intimately, like our intimacy, both sexual and emotional and spiritual, like there wasn't anything that I could say like, wow, that was like some crazy new technique. It was really about the intention that he
mm,
was bringing, and like the pacing and the curiosity and the openness of his heart that I hadn't experienced. And so
mm,
I thought that was pretty cool. And I started to, like, with him, I had some of my first, like full body orgasms and penetrative orgasms that I hadn't experienced before.
mm,
And he also was very spiritual, and I had some incredible discussions that I wasn't having with my other friends in Chicago. It was like a very different relationship with the world, and he was expanding me basically.
mm,
And from there, I just started to, pick up little things here and there. I was really in it for the sex tricks in the beginning. But as I mentioned, like it's not very far down the road that you start to come across these pieces of inner child healing and
yeah.
healing the relationship to the body, and seeing that it's really like so much more, especially Tantra itself. Tantra is a Sanskrit word and Sanskrit lineage. Tan means to expand, tra means to liberate. So Tantra as a modality holistically is one that is meant to be expansive and liberating for you. And what I
Mm,
love about that definition is that it is so broad. And I will say that my book isn't exclusively a Tantra book. Tantra is so many things. It's meditation, it's a lifestyle, it's a yogic practice. Like there's so much to it, but I do use many of the foundations of Tantra in the book.
mm.
And it's about finding that expansion and liberation, specifically in relation to the energy that brought you into this world. So yeah, I just started dabbling more and more, and then I started to go to workshops and retreats and worked one-on-one with people, and before long it kind of just took over my life. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. And so how did you or when did you get to a place where you felt the power within you and the expansion and that expression of sovereignty? Like how many years into the journey were
you
you?
know it's a non-linear practice, so it's
Mm,
like I could say that I felt it before I even knew what Tantra was. I just didn't have a name for it. It was these
mm,
little sparks that I would feel, this energy of being turned on by life. And when I say turned on by life, it's not about feeling this like erotic turn on for like everyone around you all the time. It's like feeling that energy that I feel like everyone kind of feels it differently. But for me, it's like this bubble of my aura just expands. I feel this rush within me. And
mm,
oftentimes it's not like erotically charged at all. Like, I remember when I first was like starting to put a name to some of these things, I ran into this like older woman on the street. I'm not gay or
mm,
bi, like I don't like women, but
uh,
she just was so radiant and alive that I felt that like, and sometimes you feel it when you eat a really good piece of food or you see a
mm,
gorgeous sunset. It's like that. So I had it before, but I feel that the more I have dedicated my life to this practice with curiosity, the more it's become like my day to day. I was saying to my husband like a few days ago that I was just like thinking, like, I was like, wow, in the last week, I've had like 5 perfect days. Like 5 out of the
mm,
7 days in the last week have been a day where I would say, like, that was like a perfect day. If someone was to ask me, what's your perfect day? I would describe today. And they were
wow.
all completely different, but they were all just like beautiful and balanced. And there were moments that were challenging and like confusing and scary, but it was like it turned me on. I was like, okay, like here's a
Amazing.
challenge. How can I use this as like a sacred opportunity to up level? And it's just like, that's what it becomes. It's like training yourself to see the world and see everything as sacred. And that's another foundation of Tantra, that it's all sacred, everything. And
Mm.
that's why sexuality is such like a taboo piece. It's like, how can that be sacred?
Yeah.
But it is.
Well, how I guess at what point, or do you remember when it stopped becoming so taboo and stopped becoming so shameful and started becoming just this beautiful expression of yourself?
Yeah, God. I think that it feels like a similar answer, that it's like there
Hmm.
was never like a light flip switch and it was suddenly different. And even
Hmm.
today, like I was nervous to have this conversation with you. There's still a part of me that's like, okay, like here I go. And I'm going to hold
Awesome.
this challenging topic and hope that it lands. And it doesn't a lot of the time. You know, like there are moments where I open my Instagram and I'm like bracing myself for someone
Hmm.
to be triggered, you know, because it's just a part of the reality of working with this. So I can't
Yeah.
even say that it's like gone, like that I'm not like like there are moments where I even like second guess and question, but then I come back to what I know is true and what's
Hmm.
brought me freedom and expansion and what I've seen work for so many others.
Amazing.
So I'm
Amazing.
sorry I can't like pin
Yeah, no, that's,
exact.
I mean, it's beautiful because I guess the question also is, do you feel any shame today about anything?
Um, so I think that I kind of answered that. So the answer is there's always that like little piece of conditioning or fear that's not mine, that
Hmm.
you know wants to take up a little bit of space,
Yeah.
but it's not my truth. It's not like
Yeah. Yeah.
at my core, like there, like I hear that it's gotten a lot quieter, you
Hmm.
know, and even now it's like when I hear that voice or that critic or however you want to describe it, that shame, I guess is the word you said it. When I hear that shame come up, I just get curious about it and I ask it, what is going on? What is the story here? And
Hmm.
at this point, I know that no matter what happens, that externally or internally brings on that like moment of like shame or blame or whatever, that I
Hmm.
can easily and more quickly get back to the result of knowing that I am inherently good and
Yeah.
the energy that brought me into this world is inherently good.
Yeah.
And not even necessarily inherently good. I know that my relationship to it is inherently good. But this energy, sexuality, just like money, can be used to create more peace and love and joy in the world, or it can be used to create damage and fear and shame. And it's about how do we channel this energy.
Hmm. I think that is such an important lesson. And the more I've talked to, like I had a podcast that came out recently that the the gal was a breathwork facilitator, and when she was in middle school, she started doing breath work, and the Christian crowd turned it down, had it shut down because it was witchcraft. And I grew up in that world. I understand that. Like I was taught like imagination is satanic and all like crazy stuff. Like you really have had a
Wow.
deep program from so much insanity. And I don't get trolled from anyone except Christian people to this day. It's so funny. And I'm like, man, but why I bring that up is, and I explained to her, everything is about intention. And like a gun is a neutral machine. And with the intent to protect and save life or feed family, it's good. And intent to hurt another person, innocent person, it's bad. Like you're saying, these tools can be used for good or bad. Money can be used for good and bad. Everything comes back to, and I think this is what is a big theme from this podcast with you, is that everything comes back to responsibility. And we've abdicated a responsibility, and these systems or institutions or these foundational matrix pieces that say we are the responsible party for you. Give us your thought, give us your belief, give us your identity, give us your afterlife and pre-life and during life. And to call that all back into ourselves and to choose to play with this energy in a beautiful and healthy relationship, that's liberating. I guess that is tantra. That is like,
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, in tantra there is no good, bad, right or wrong. It's all intention, and it's all about discernment as well, and knowing
Mm,
what is in service to your unique highest good, right? And so many of us have learned that sex and sexuality and our desires are dangerous, but we don't create safety around our desires or sexuality by ignoring it or shoving it down. We create safety by mastering it. And
mm,
that's what this book is about. That's what this work is about. It's about, creating a safe space for you to explore, get curious, open up about these themes so that you can create mastery, which then creates safety around the themes that we've been
mm.
told are dangerous or that we should be afraid of.
Right.
Because there's a truth. There's a truth to the fact that sexuality and our sexual desires are very powerful and intense. And if we don't have mastery, like that's going to blow up some area of your life, probably at one point or another. So let's shine some light in there and get curious. And then, as you heal these, like the sexual shadow is what I call it. As you heal the sexual shadow, then you get to step into the space of, expanding your awareness, expanding your understanding of what is possible. What does it look like to, have more intentional intimacy? What does it look like to have sex that is restorative or transformative, that literally
Mm,
changes the way that you think about the world? And then also, what is it like to really liberate your sexuality? What is it like to connect to this power, this energy that brought you into this world, and use it to intentionally connect to God, to your deepest desires, to manifest via sex magic, or even to play with, the primal, the dark, the kink and the BDSM? What does it look like to explore the energy of sacred surrender? What could it look like to see, like, being tied up or dominated as an opportunity to actually just go really deep within yourself and get
mm.
curious about what's going on in your subconscious, because you're someone else's, curating the experience and keeping you safe in a way. And that's like a whole other conversation. But
Yeah,
that's some of the
amazing.
potential of what can happen
Right.
once you do some of the healing work.
Amazing. So let's pivot more into, you've worked with a lot of people, you host retreats, you do one-on-one sessions. Like, share some stories of people that you've seen maybe who were bound real tightly by fear or anxiety or shame or whatever their past traumas were, and came into the space and totally transformed.
Yeah, so many good ones. One that's coming up now that I like to share about a lot was a couple that I worked with. And I worked with them on a one-to-one retreat. So it was just me and them for 3 days, really going deep into this work. And on the very first night, I had them do some like really simple but profound exercises around tantra, reclaiming their relationship to their bodies, seeing
Mm.
each other as divine beings. And at the end, after we closed the ritual, we, were hanging out outside under the stars. And the wife had said to me, I haven't, looked at my husband in the eyes this long since we were standing at the altar, which was 20 years before. They'd been married for 20 years. So to have this like reconnection to intimacy. And then she went on to say, like everyone needs to know this stuff at their honeymoon. Like I shouldn't have had to wait this
Wow.
long, you
Wow.
know, to get these tools. My husband's another great example. I met him through this work. He had a completely different relationship to his body and his sexuality. He would never get naked in front of me. He was always like even after we were dating, even after we had sex, he was like always had his clothes. He was like very shy about his body.
Mm.
He went to a retreat. He went to our retreat as well as a couple others that I'd recommended, and he came back and it was like a different man was just like walking around the house naked,
Wow.
singing. And I was like, this is insane. Like, I didn't even know that, like, I knew that he was going to change, but seeing his relationship and also his range of sexuality changed so much. When we first got together, it felt like we were always having the same type of sex. And I was like, there's a lot more. Can we expand this? And now we have this incredible, beautiful range of intimacy, whereas before
Wow.
he was in this pattern, um, and he had his own, sexual trauma and things that aren't necessarily as much my story
Yeah,
to
sure.
share.
Yeah.
I've had women come to me that like can't handle penetration at all because it's just so painful. And what
Mm,
it came down to is, because of their trauma, their shame around their pussy, their past sexual assault, their bodies became so tense
mm,
at the possibility of sexual intimacy that it's like they can't enjoy anything, and it's just contracting and hurting so bad. And using
mm.
these tools of breath and softening, slowing down and getting curious and asking her own body for consent allowed her to finally have her first penetrative orgasm. So
Wow.
there's
Wow.
so much available. Those are three examples: one from a
Yeah.
woman, one from a man, one from a couple.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, your process of writing this book, I'm sure brought up a lot of inner voice and self-doubt and the critics and all that. Like, what was that journey for you to finally get this thing out? And again, I'm going to say it is fantastic. It is so good. I mean, it makes sense that you're a copywriter, and creative director. I mean, it flows really well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a journey. And so we're recording this like a little bit before it's officially released to the
Mhm,
public.
mhm,
And even now, I'm like, I'm really nervous. I'm really nervous about this going out there. Um, so the writing process itself was wild. Like
mm,
every range of emotional experience. Like I went on one of the periods where I got the most work done. I went on like a writing retreat that I created myself in Topanga, California, and like I have videos of me just like bawling my eyes
mm,
out
yeah,
in this like feeling like I don't think I can do, the whole thing, and like the
yeah,
world is against me. And then there are moments where like I would start to read things and think, oh my God, this is really good. Like this is going to change someone's life.
yeah.
So it's like every, and writing a book, it's like it's such a long process. There's so many levels of writing and then going back and rewriting. And I'll say even now, like I don't want to read it again because I'm going to have all of the criticisms. I'm going to have I'm going to have a
Mm,
list of like 20 new things I want to add. Like I wrote the bulk of this book about a year and a half ago, and so much has changed since then. There's so many things I want to add to it. So with a book, it's kind of like you just gotta trust when it's ready, it's ready. It goes out. Maybe there'll be another edition. And having my friends and some people that I really look up to and trust who have also written books that have been bestsellers. I've had some of them read like little bits of it.
yeah.
And one said to me, she was like, this is really honest. Like, this is really vulnerable and honest. And I read that and I immediately got like, oh my God,
Mm,
she's right. Did I say too much?
mm,
But it's my truth is that vulnerability is the birthplace of a lot of beauty and
yes,
power and
yes,
transformation. So I'm
yes,
leaning into that, even though
yes.
it's scary.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I define in my TED talk, I redefine the word vulnerability as having the courage to experience love in its purest form. Like
Mm,
truly, like true vulnerability is having the courage to go through the veil of fear, which is so opaque but thin. And when we pierce that, that's where we can experience love in its purest form, which is essentially
yeah.
what you're teaching and living. And um, so at these retreats that you do, I mean, I'm sure you probably get the spectrum of people, but what would you say is like the main outcome for people that leave? I guess what are they kind of this before attending and post attending? What's kind of the main outcomes for people?
Yeah. So, I would say that you could do this retreat over and over again and have a different like takeaway every
Mm,
time. It's one of those experiences that
interesting.
really meets you where you're at. I will say that the primary takeaways I'll kind of like base off of the themes that we explore. So the first thing that I would say is that people step away feeling more empowered to understand what their desires are without shame, guilt, or fear, be able
Mm.
to communicate those desires and also set boundaries, and feeling safe to like explore their edges, push their edges while also upholding their boundaries. So basically sovereignty, like in their sexuality and in their body, I would say is one main takeaway that people get. Another takeaway is having, rewritten their relationship to their body, seeing their body as a temple, as a beautiful place to feel God inside of themselves.
Mm.
And then I would say a third takeaway is around, feeling the power of their sexuality as an ally in creating the life, the relationship, the experience that is going to bring them the greatest love in this life. And then finally, I'll just say, because it is a group, it's a group container. So it's about 30 of us that go in as strangers and then leave with this sense of deep bonding. We keep the group chats open and they're very alive, like even post the
Wow.
retreat. So you have this new imprint on what is possible, like in community. Like this is what the world could look like if we all had
Mm.
these tools, right? So just rewriting your relationship to what it means to be in community, to be accepted, to be loved for who you are. And then there's a bunch of other little pieces that can
Mm.
come through.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Um, Man, sis, what a what a cool thing to talk about, and I'm even thinking of people listening to this, like, this is it's funny where this podcast is heard all over the world, and where people listen, like in Russia, it's like a top spiritual podcast in Russia, and like, man, Russians are gonna
Really?
hear the yeah, it's really interesting, like where
Hello,
this
Russia.
resonates, hello Russia. Um, and I just think it's so beautiful, but because what it shows me is that we're waking up to leaving, and this is, and I'm in this, like I talked to you, like this chrysalis season in my life, but ultimately, and I think this is fascinating because you don't have any religious baggage that hung over you necessarily, or you, at least I didn't ask you, and it didn't sound like you do, but I saw a post today on Twitter that said, religions are about to crumble and people are not prepared for like what, like that's eroding. And I know it's eroding. And
Hmm.
I've read the Bible 7 times cover to cover. Like I was really deep into this world, sis, like hardcore. Um, but there's this sense that there's this verse in the Bible that says, come out of her, referring to the great whore of Babylon, blah, 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 which is like, basically, I think it's Rome, and the Catholic Church is like infiltrated the world, shamed the world, traumatized the world, controlled the world, all these things. Anyway, that's another story. However, there's this whole concept of coming out of her, coming out of this system. And I don't know if her, maybe because this topic of what we're talking about is not the right pronoun, but coming out of this system of control and slavery and mental enslavement and this um, emasculation of our own abilities to understand the beauty of who we are, and we are waking up to ourselves. Like I talk about sovereignty quite a bit in the last troll that I had, and I hear this a lot by Christians, like God is the only sovereign and we're not made to be sovereign, we're made to worship a sovereign. And like that is just not true. It's not even biblically true. There's no scripture that says that. But
Yeah.
also, if we're made in the image of God, and I love how you just described something that's so fascinating that put a piece together for me. Because the Bible always talks about our body's a temple, our body's the temple, our body's the temple, but then it's talked about in so much shame, like don't treat the temple bad, as opposed to what are temples? That's where you experience closeness to God. That's where you
Hmm.
go. People would go have we can experience God anywhere, nature or whatever, but there's these set aside, dedicated places to experience this presence. And it's like, wow, we carry this around, the ability to have this. Like I was big into plant medicine for a very long time. And the last podcast of the breathwork facilitator, I'm like, isn't it amazing? We walk around with this ability to have, and I've done holotropic breathwork sessions where I've had more prolific psychedelic experiences just from breathing in my own body than I would go into these retreats, far away and all these different things. And it's similar to what you're saying is like, God, we are the temple, and to experience God inside the temple and to worship and honor and love and adore not something externally, but something that is so intimately us. It's a really beautiful concept.
It really is. Yeah, this work is about finding God in your body. Finding God in your body, getting curious and comfortable about that relationship as
Mm,
well. I didn't have I definitely had religious trauma, not to the degree
mm,
that it sounds like you had, but it
mhm.
was definitely, a part of my reality. But it's obviously shifted a lot since doing
Yeah,
this work.
yeah.
I like love Jesus. I'm like Jesus and Mary Magdalene's like a sex priestess.
Mm.
Like that's my truth. There's books out there on that I can
Yeah,
share.
I
But
have. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I actually so when my husband and I were together for like 3 months, he had just started going back to church. And
Mm.
I was like waiting. Do you mind if I share? Do we have time for me to
We
share like a
have,
little
yeah, we're
story?
not in a rush. No, no, keep, yeah, this is
Okay.
great. I'm loving this.
So, yeah, my husband and I just started dating, and he had just started going to church around the same time. And I knew the invitation was coming for him
Mm.
to ask me to go to church with him, but I didn't want to do it. I was like, I don't want to go to church with you at all. But when he did ask me, I, was like, okay, I can tell this is important to you. Yes, I'll go to church with you. Let's do it. So we picked the day that I would go. We at that point we were living separately. So I had to like pack my bag for the weekend to go and stay at his place downtown. And
Mm.
so I had to pre-pack the things that I would wear to church. And I didn't really think about what I was gonna wear. I was just like, oh, I'm going to church. I pick out this outfit. It's this like red dress, like this like strappy red dress. It's from Royal Codes. I don't know if you know that
I love
brand
it.
or if people
No.
listening know. It's like the priestess clothes. It's like if you see on Instagram women that are like with the sage bundles and like it's like it's that's what they're wearing. They're wearing Royal Codes.
Amazing. Amazing.
So I grabbed that and then I grabbed like a little red shawl to put over it. Don't think anything of it. The next day, I'm like at his house in the bathroom. I'm like naked. I'm like, look at my outfit for church. I'm gonna be naked. God made me this outfit. I'm like joking around and he's laughing with me. But then I finally like put on the outfit that I'm gonna wear
Mm.
to church. And he was so triggered. This man
Mm.
was like, you cannot go to church dressed like that.
Yeah.
This man is now my husband. I have consent to share this story. We've like told the story on my podcast.
Love it.
Um, but he's like, you cannot wear that to church. And this is like kind of what it means to be like in this world and to be really like intensely devoted to seducing the world into a greater good,
Mm.
being evidence of, a new way of being. It's being your authentic self and stepping into a church like that and being like, I didn't even think anything of it. I was like, of course this is fine to wear to church. And then I was like, oh yeah, this is like kind of slutty objectively, probably to
Mm.
the mainstream and to this church. But to me, I'm thinking, no, I'm going to church. I want to dress like a priestess because I'm going to church. Like this is what
Mm.
makes me feel like a priestess. I haven't been to church in like 15 years, maybe
Wow.
more. This is
Wow.
this is my opportunity to rewrite my relationship to this physical temple that I haven't had a relationship with for,
Right.
a long, long time.
Right.
So we get into this back and forth. He's like, well, we're just not gonna go to church anymore then. I said, okay, well, I'm going to church. So I ordered an Uber. I have like this image of him imprinted in my brain. He's like behind his computer, like biting his nails. I'm like, okay, bye, babe. I'll see you later. And I go to church. I go to this church that I've never been to before. It's my first time again in 15 years. I get there, it's super packed. Inevitably, it was the most packed the church had ever been. This
Wow.
was like the most packed service that they'd ever seen. And so they actually had to close the doors and they had people in the lobby, like watching on the screens the
Wow.
sermon. I just like happened to get in at like the very end. So I'm at church. I see him texting me. I'm crying. I'm like, healing.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get something out. I'm like, this sermon is really nice. I really liked the singing. The
Mm.
only thing that I didn't resonate with is like in one of the songs, it said like something along the lines of, we're not worthy of God's
Yeah.
love. And I was
Right.
like, it's
Right.
a hard pass.
Yeah.
Hard pass on that one. But
Yeah.
everything else was like good. No one like even really gave me any funny looks or said anything about my clothes. Like it was fine. When the service was complete, I opened the doors. My husband was standing there, was like, I'm so sorry. You're right. This is me. This is my shadow. This is my piece.
Amazing.
Totally owned it, apologized. And like, that's what it was. Like that day I was calling him forth to be, a man, like the man that he, said that he was, a man that loved me for all that I am,
Wow.
saw the priestess, saw the intention behind it, saw that I was giving everyone there an opportunity to rewrite their judgment around the body, around sensuality, all the pieces. So
Mm.
that's
Incredible.
that's my church
Incredible.
story.
Amazing. Well, what a great, that is a great story. Um, Man, I hope this isn't the last episode we do together. I think you're amazing, truly.
Thank you.
Just
I
the
love, yeah.
articulation of your journey and your path, this book, your message. It's incredibly important. I just, for me personally, and also I know for so many, and we talked about this. I really believe the majority of the world has been sexually traumatized, and it's just no one talks about it. And the reason, and you said the stats that 10 times more likely the perpetrator was perpetrated upon, they were a victim at one time. And, the narrative hurt people hurt people. Well, at some point, someone has to draw the line in the sand and say the pain stops with me, or the shame stops with me, or the taboo stops with me. And that's what real light worker are about. It's bringing light in places where there is darkness, and
Yeah.
inner, and also I think social. And so this is such a beautiful episode. And sis, truly, everyone, when this comes out, go buy this book, Sacred Sex Ed. Um, Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having the
you.
courage to share and coming on. This has been really beautiful.
Yeah, and thank you for being a yes to this, because that's also courageous to be a yes to sharing this topic with, a community. And
Mm,
yeah, I really appreciate you being a champion to this. It
yeah.
means so, so much. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, sis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your beautiful story and your journey. I know this book is going to bless and heal so many people. It's already done so much healing in my own journey, just being comfortable with holding space in my mind about what I've gone through, where I am today, and where I know I get to step into the future. So blessings to you, sis. Everyone go check out Leola. Find her. I'll put her handle and all our information in the show notes. Buy the book and be blessed. Again, thank you for joining. I am Lucas Mack. This is the Lucas Mack Show, and I'll talk to you on the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you're struggling to break free and need support, go to my website at lucasmack.com. There you'll find resources like videos and ebooks, and also information on how to work with me for coaching. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you soon.